There's a particular kind of silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. For years, Melania Trump occupied one of the most visible and scrutinized roles in all of American public life, the position of First Lady of the United States. She stood beside her husband on debate stages, waved from the steps of Air Force One, and hosted dignitaries from across the globe inside the walls of the White House. But somewhere along the way, that presence faded. The appearances became less frequent, the campaign trail grew quieter, and the woman who once graced the covers of the world's most prestigious fashion magazines retreated almost entirely from public view. Today, as Donald Trump once again commands the political stage, Melania is notably, and rather conspicuously, absent. And while some have speculated, some have whispered, and some have even flown banners over football stadiums asking, "Where's Melania?" The truth is, when you look closely enough, her absence is really no secret at all. It is the natural conclusion of a life lived entirely on her own terms. To truly understand why Melania Trump has chosen the path she currently walks, you have to go back to the beginning, not to the glittering ballrooms of Mar-a-Lago or the polished corridors of the West Wing, but to a small concrete building in the village of Sevnica, nestled quietly in the lower Sava Valley of Slovenia. That is where Melania Trump was born and raised, in a modest household shaped by working-class parents. Her father worked in the automobile industry, and her mother was a skilled pattern maker in children's clothing manufacturing. It was a simple life, grounded in practicality and discipline, far removed from the flashing cameras and political theater that would eventually define so much of her adult years. From those humble origins, Melania displayed an early instinct for reinvention. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, she pursued a modeling career that took her from the runways of Europe to the apartments of New York City, where she shared living quarters with a photographer and began immersing herself in the world of high fashion. She appeared in some of the most celebrated magazines in the world, worked alongside legendary photographers, and built a reputation as someone possessing not just extraordinary physical presence, but also a quiet, composed intelligence that set her apart in an industry that often prizes spectacle over substance. She was not loud. She was not desperate for attention. She simply existed, beautifully, deliberately, and on her own schedule. That foundational character trait, the deep, unshakable comfort with her own company and her own choices, never left her. It followed her into marriage, into the White House, and ultimately into the deliberate withdrawal from public life that defines her existence today. When Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, the world watched with intense curiosity to see what kind of First Lady Melania would be. History had offered a fairly consistent template: an engaged, publicly active partner who championed causes, gave speeches, and maintained a warm, accessible presence. Hillary Clinton had done it. Michelle Obama had done it with particular energy and grace. Even Barbara Bush and Laura Bush, women of quieter dispositions, had fulfilled the expected public dimensions of the role with visible enthusiasm. Melania was different from the very start. Those who worked alongside her at the White House consistently described a woman who valued order, privacy, and a degree of personal autonomy that was somewhat unusual for the position. She was not a socializer by instinct. She did not crave the validation of public appearances or media attention. Staffers noted that she frequently preferred the calm of her private quarters over the noise of Washington's endless social circuit, often choosing to leave events early when the occasion permitted. She launched her Be Best initiative focused on children's well-being and online safety, but she pursued it in a manner consistent with her personality, measured, deliberate, and without the theatrical flourish that Washington typically demands. Even her fashion choices became a form of communication, sometimes controversial, always deliberate. The green jacket, the white hat, the stilettos on the tarmac. Whether one interpreted these choices as calculated statements or personal preferences, they consistently reinforced the same message. Melania Trump was going to do this on her own terms, or she was not going to do it at all. The public first took serious notice of Melania's capacity for extended absence back in 2018, when she vanished from public view for nearly a month. The speculation was immediate and intense. Social media platforms overflowed with theories, ranging from cosmetic surgery to marital separation to something far more dramatic. Cable news panels devoted significant airtime to the question of where Exactly. The First Lady of the United States had gone. The White House's responses were vague and unsatisfying, which only intensified the curiosity. When the truth finally emerged, it was far more straightforward than the theory suggested. Melania had undergone a medical procedure, an embolization surgery to address a benign kidney condition, and she had simply chosen to recover privately, away from cameras and commentary. For most people in her position, a public statement, perhaps a brief hospital photo, would have managed the situation efficiently. But Melania made a different calculation. She decided that her health, her body, and her recovery were her own business, and she treated them accordingly. What that episode revealed was not a troubled marriage or a political strategy. It revealed a woman with an extraordinarily firm sense of personal boundaries. She decided what the public needed to know, and she drew her line there. The fact that the rest of the world disagreed with where she drew that line was, by all appearances, not something that particularly troubled her. When Donald Trump formally announced his 2024 presidential campaign for Mar-a-Lago in November of 2022, the political world noticed immediately that Melania was not there. As the campaign gathered momentum through 2023 and into 2024, her absence from rallies, fundraisers, and key campaign moments became one of the recurring storylines of the election cycle. Trump's Republican rivals, many of whom were reluctant to attack him on policy grounds, found "Where's Melania?" narrative a convenient and relatively low-risk way to generate unflattering headlines. Someone went so far as to fly a banner over an Iowa football game bearing that exact question. Missing person-style posters featuring Melania's photograph were reportedly distributed. Trump addressed the situation in several interviews, and his answers were revealing in ways that perhaps he did not fully intend. Speaking to Megyn Kelly, he described Melania as very strong and very even-keeled, praising her as someone who did not need the constant glow of media attention to feel confident in herself. In an interview with Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker, he explained that Melania was focused on their son Barron's schooling, a responsibility she had always taken seriously and publicly prioritized. Then, in a moment of notable candor, Trump admitted something that cut through the political spin rather directly. He said, "Honestly, I like to keep her away from it," acknowledging that the political arena is harsh, often cruel, and not a place where someone with Melania's particular temperament and preferences would choose to spend her time voluntarily. That admission matters, because it reframes the entire narrative. The story of Melania's absence is not a story of a troubled or reluctant wife being hidden from view. It is a story of a woman who communicated her preferences clearly, and a husband who, whatever one thinks of him politically, appears to have respected those preferences when it comes to his wife's participation in public life. There is a cultural dimension to Melania's behavior that often gets overlooked in the American media's coverage of her. She was not raised in a culture that prizes relentless public visibility. She did not grow up watching politicians' wives perform warmth and accessibility as a professional obligation. Her European background, her years working in an industry that is simultaneously very public and fiercely protective of personal life off the runway, and her own introverted nature all combine to produce someone who draws a very sharp distinction between her public role and her private self. In a media environment that increasingly demands total transparency from public figures, their opinions, their relationships, their daily movements, their emotional responses to every news cycle, Melania's refusal to participate reads as strange, even suspicious. But that says something interesting about our expectations, not necessarily about her character. The assumption that a political spouse must perform constant public engagement is a cultural norm, not a legal requirement. Melania appears to have recognized this distinction early and acted on it consistently. She has also been notably consistent in her protection of her son Barron, who has largely been shielded from media exposure throughout his life in ways that other presidential children were not. That instinct, to create a zone of privacy around the people and things she loves, is the same instinct that keeps her off the campaign trail. It is not avoidance. It is protection. Melania Trump's withdrawal from public life is ultimately a reflection of several converging realities. First, she has never been comfortable with the performance aspects of political life. The forced smiles, the scripted appearances, the obligation to seem enthusiastic about events and causes that were chosen by someone else's campaign team. Second, She has priorities, namely her son and her personal life, that she has demonstrated she will not compromise for political optics. Third, the political world has not always been kind to her, and she is under no obligation to return warmth that was not offered. The media coverage of Melania throughout Donald Trump's political career has ranged from mildly sympathetic to openly mocking. Her accent, her expressions, her fashion choices, her moments of apparent reluctance at public events, all have been dissected and often used against her. A woman who values dignity and privacy above almost everything else would naturally recoil from an environment that provides so little of either. There is also something worth acknowledging about the particular exhaustion that comes with being perpetually interpreted. Every gesture Melania makes in public is analyzed for hidden meaning. Every absence becomes a headline. Every expression on her face is turned into a meme or a political statement. For someone who is fundamentally a private person, that level of relentless scrutiny is not merely unpleasant. It is genuinely depleting. Her decision to minimize her exposure to it is not weakness. It is self-preservation. In a political culture that rewards constant visibility and punishes silence, Melania Trump has made a radical and deeply personal choice. She has chosen herself. She has chosen her son, her privacy, her peace of mind, and her own definition of a life well lived over the demands of a political machine that would consume all of those things willingly and without apology. Whether one admires that choice or finds it frustrating likely depends on what one believes a political spouse's obligations actually are. But the fact remains that Melania Trump has never pretended to be someone she is not. She has never promised the American public a level of engagement she was unwilling to deliver. She arrived in this role as a private, self-contained, fiercely independent woman, and she has remained exactly that, regardless of the cameras, the banners, the speculation, and the endless headlines asking where she has gone. The answer, it turns out, has always been the same. She is exactly where she wants to be. And for a woman who has spent much of her life navigating worlds built by and for other people's ambitions, perhaps that is the most honest and human thing about her. It was never really a secret. We simply weren't paying attention to the right things.